Well, we should remember that a couple of villages is not very much, but what matters is that these uh, are apparently Russian nationals who have decided to fight against Russia, or specifically against today's Russian regime. And I think the important thing to remember about dictatorships or authoritarian countries or even totalitarian countries is that they can never completely command the loyalty of the population.
Is it the prospect of the discussion on nuclear war feels like it's often around whenever we're talking about Putin? Is it usual for him to be talking about it in these specific terms 2 days before an election?
Putin does like to raise the specter of nuclear war, does he not? And it's obviously a big bazooka you can use if you are a nuclear country. But it's also, I think, a sign of weakness that he feels compelled to talk about nuclear war so often, because it suggests that he doesn't have anything else to threaten others with. And I think that's where we are now.
What do you make of this Russian incursion? People from coming from Ukraine, Russian-born people from Ukraine, coming into Russia and taking a couple of villages. Is that just a skirmish? What does that actually mean?
Well, we should remember that a couple of villages is not very much, but what matters is that these uh, are apparently Russian nationals who have decided to fight against Russia, or specifically against today's Russian regime. And I think the important thing to remember about dictatorships or authoritarian countries or even totalitarian countries is that they can never completely command the loyalty of the population. Yes, they do have certain elements of pressure that they can use, but people, if they are determined to stand up for a different opinion, some are willing to do so and risk their lives doing it. And apparently, that's what the members of these groups are doing. And you can say it's a sort of a suicide mission, because they are never going to be able to unseat Putin or reclaim for themselves large parts of Russia. But it is a symbolic mission they are on, and clearly with some success.
Presumably, the West has to be clear that no weapons they're providing to Ukraine get into the hands of these Russians fighting in Russia, because there might be a worry, I guess, if it's US provided materials that get captured by Russia in any combat in its own country.
Indeed, and that's why Ukraine has been saying very clearly that these groups are not working operating on behalf of the Ukrainian authorities, or indeed cooperating with Ukrainian authorities, because even if there are some links, Ukraine wants to be seen as a good steward of the weaponry that the West provides. And I think it's also safe to say that whatever weapons these formations have are not going to be Western weapons anyway. It's not that sort of sophisticated weaponry that the West has been providing to the Ukrainian armed forces. But what matters is that these groups do exist, and they show that there is opposition to Putin within Russia, or not just they show, they are the most vivid expression to date of that opposition, and it's clearly good news for Ukraine that they do exist, even if they don't operate on behalf of Ukraine.
Do you think there's any situation in which there will be ever NATO forces, Western troops in Ukraine itself? Macron really surprised the world when he said he'd consider, to a certain extent, French boots on the ground in Ukraine. We've obviously got the looming presidential elections in America, which might change the geopolitics of the whole situation if Donald Trump is elected. Do you think it's likely there'll ever be Western troops formally in Ukraine fighting in this war?
It's one of those situations where it seems extremely unlikely until it happens, and then when it happens, it seems extremely likely. But what Macron has done is raise the prospect of this happening, and he is the strategic thinker among European leaders, and I wonder where we'll be after his second term ends. But with him broaching this subject, all of a sudden it has become more likely. And then once a major leader, the leader of a major country, advances such an idea, then it's easier for leaders of smaller countries to say, yeah, we might be willing to also have similarly have troops from our country operate in Ukraine. But we should remember that any such decision would have to involve some sort of NATO consensus within NATO. You're not going to have individual countries volunteer their soldiers on their own. And that consensus would be very difficult to reach within NATO.
You can imagine even more difficult if Donald Trump were president as well, you would think. Elisabeth, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.